The harsh spring sunlight blinded Madeline Vance as she stepped down from the dusty stagecoach, her boots meeting the unpaved main street of Las Vegas, New Mexico territory with a soft thud. It was May 1878, and the railroad had only recently connected this frontier settlement to the civilized world she'd left behind in Boston. Clutching her valise in one hand and the letter of appointment in the other, she surveyed the bustling town with a mixture of trepidation and determination. At 23, she had traveled over 1,000 miles to begin a new chapter as the town's schoolteacher, leaving behind the painful memories of her parents' deaths and a broken engagement. Miss Vance. A portly man with a walrus mustache approached, mopping his brow with a handkerchief despite the mild temperature. Mayor Wilkins, welcome to Las Vegas. Madeline straightened her travel-worn skirt and extended her hand. Thank you, Mayor. I'm eager to see the schoolhouse and meet the children. The mayor's smile faltered. About that, there's been a development. Perhaps we should discuss this in my office. Following Mayor Wilkins down the dusty street, Madeline noticed the curious stares of townsfolk. Women whispered behind gloved hands while men openly assessed her. She lifted her chin, having expected some scrutiny as an unmarried woman traveling alone to such a remote place. The mayor's office was a small room attached to the general store, cluttered with papers and smelling of tobacco. He gestured for her to sit in a wooden chair facing his desk. Miss Vance, I regret to inform you that the town council has reconsidered its position on hiring a new teacher. He avoided her eyes, rearranging papers on his desk. Madeline felt her stomach drop. I don't understand. I have your letter right here offering me the position. Yes, well, circumstances have changed, Mayor Wilkins sighed. When we sent that letter, we believed you were somewhat older, a matronly woman with extensive experience. I graduated at the top of my class from the Boston Teachers College, Madeline countered, reaching into her bag for her credentials. The mayor waved his hand dismissively. It's not a question of qualifications, Miss Vance. It's a matter of propriety. Las Vegas is a growing town with a certain reputation to maintain. A young, unmarried woman teaching our children without proper supervision, it simply won't do. Mayor Wilkins, I assure you my moral character is beyond reproach. I've dedicated my life to education. The decision is final, he interrupted, his tone hardening. The council voted yesterday. We've decided to wait for a more suitable candidate. More suitable, Madeline echoed, her voice rising. You mean a man or an older woman? Sir, I've traveled nearly 2,000 miles based on your written promise of employment. The town will refund your stage fare, he offered, not meeting her eyes. And what am I supposed to do now? Where am I to go? Her voice remained steady despite her rising panic. There's a boarding house where you can stay until the next eastbound stage, which comes through in 3 days. He slid a few dollars across the desk. For your troubles. Madeline left the money untouched. I came here to teach, Mayor. These children need education. What these children need isn't for you to decide, Miss Vance. His tone was final. Good day. Stepping back onto the street, Madeline blinked away tears of frustration. Her savings wouldn't last long, and the prospect of returning east in defeat was unthinkable. She had sold nearly everything she owned to make this journey. Didn't go well, I reckon. She turned to find a tall man leaning against a hitching post, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. When he straightened, she noticed his striking blue eyes contrasting with sun-bronzed skin. I'm sorry, I don't believe we've been introduced, she replied stiffly. He touched the brim of his hat. Daniel Yates, most folks call me Dane. Madeline Vance. She offered no further information, unwilling to admit her predicament to a stranger, schoolteacher from back east, right? When her eyes widened in surprise, he continued, small town. News travels fast, especially when the council spent all yesterday arguing about sending you back where you came from. How kind of them to decide my fate before even meeting me, she said bitterly. Folks here are set in their ways. He studied her thoughtfully. What will you do now? I haven't decided. She lifted her chin. But I didn't come all this way to turn back at the first obstacle. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. The Lucky Star boarding house is down that way, he pointed. Mrs. Holloway's fair-minded, at least. Thank you, Mr. Yates. Just Dane. He touched his hat again before untying a magnificent chestnut horse. And Miss Vance, this town's children could use some proper schooling. Don't give up just yet. Before she could respond, he swung into the saddle with fluid grace and rode away, leaving her to wonder about the unexpected encouragement from a rough-looking cowboy. The Lucky Star boarding house proved to be a tidy two-story building at the edge of town. The proprietress, Mrs. Holloway, was a plump widow in her 50s who clucked sympathetically at Madeline's plight. It's shameful, is what it is, she declared while showing Madeline to a small but clean room. Those men on the council, thinking they know what's best for our children when half of them can barely sign their own names. You don't agree with their decision? Madeline asked, surprised to find an ally. I've been saying for years we need a proper teacher, Mrs. Holloway replied. Ever since old Mr. Finch passed on, the children have had nothing but occasional lessons from whoever could spare the time. Pastor Roberts tries, but he's only one man with many duties. Then why would they reject me? Madeline set her valise on the narrow bed. Mrs. Holloway hesitated. It's not just about you being young and unmarried, though that's part of it. Some folks here are suspicious of Eastern education. They think you'll fill their children's heads with ideas that don't belong in a place like this. Ideas like reading and mathematics, Madeline asked dryly. The older woman chuckled. Among other dangerous notions, I'm sure. Her expression grew serious. Don't be too quick to judge them harshly. Life is hard here and change doesn't always feel welcome. After Mrs. Holloway left, Madeline unpacked her few belongings, including several beloved books and teaching materials she'd brought along. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she unfolded the letter that had brought her west, rereading the now hollow promises it contained. We are in dire need of a qualified educator, it read, and your credentials are most impressive. The position includes room and board plus a modest salary. Tears threatened again, but Madeline pushed them back. Self-pity would solve nothing. Instead, she opened her journal and began to write, organizing her thoughts as she considered her options. Returning east was financially impossible and personally unthinkable. Staying in Las Vegas without employment was equally impractical. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Miss Vance, you have a visitor downstairs, Mrs. Holloway called. Puzzled, Madeline checked her appearance in the small mirror, smoothed her hair, and descended to the parlor. To her surprise, the cowboy from earlier, Dane Yates, stood by the fireplace, hat in hand. He seemed taller indoors, his shoulders broad beneath a faded blue shirt. Mr. Yates, she acknowledged with a nod. This is unexpected, Miss Vance. He shifted slightly, betraying a hint of discomfort at being inside the prim boarding house. I've been thinking about your situation. Have you now? She couldn't keep a touch of defensiveness from her voice. I have land about 3 miles outside town, good water, good soil. His eyes met hers directly, and about 24 children within riding distance who have never had proper schooling. Madeline blinked, unsure where this was heading. I don't understand. I'm offering you a job, Miss Vance, as a teacher, not in town but on my ranch. Her heart quickened with hope, but caution prevailed. You want me to teach at your ranch? Do you have family there, Mr. Yates? Just hands, all grown men, he clarified quickly, understanding her concern. But there are neighboring ranches and farms with children. Mexican families, too, working smaller plots. None can spare their children for the trip to town, even if the town wanted to teach them, which it doesn't. You're suggesting I teach the children the council rejected, Madeline clarified, intrigued despite herself. Along with those they never considered in the first place. Something in his expression hardened. Town folks aren't the only ones with young ones needing learning. Where would these lessons take place? Dane Yates hesitated. That's the catch. I don't have a proper building yet, but I'm good with my hands. I could build something suitable with help from my men. You would build a schoolhouse. Madeline couldn't mask her astonishment. It wouldn't be fancy, he warned. Not at first, but it would keep the rain off and have proper windows for light. Why would you do this, Mr. Yates? For children who aren't your own. Something flickered in his eyes, a shadow of old pain, quickly hidden. Education matters. I learned that the hard way. Madeline studied him carefully. Despite his rough appearance, there was an intelligence in his gaze that suggested depths beyond the typical ranch owner. Where would I live? She asked, practical concerns asserting themselves. There's a small cabin near the main house. It needs work, but it would be yours alone. Meals with me and the hands in the main house unless you prefer privacy. And my compensation, room, board, and the same salary the town offered. When she looked skeptical, he added, I run one of the largest cattle operations in the territory, Miss Vance. I can afford a teacher's salary. The offer was tempting more than tempting, yet caution made her hesitate. This is highly irregular, Mr. Yates. A single woman living on a ranch with no other female companionship. Mrs. Holloway can vouch for my character, he said, gesturing to the landlady who had been pretending not to eavesdrop. And Senora Diaz comes to cook and clean 3 times weekly. Her husband works for me, Mrs. Holloway stepped forward. Dane Yates is the most honorable man in the territory, Miss Vance. If he gives his word, you can trust it with your life. Madeline took a deep breath. The sensible thing would be to return east to find a position in a respectable town with proper oversight. Yet something about this opportunity called to her deepest beliefs about education and purpose. I would need to see the property first, she said carefully, and meet some of these families whose children I would be teaching. Relief flashed across Dane's face. I can arrange that tomorrow if you're willing. I'll need to consider carefully after that, she cautioned. This isn't a decision to make lightly. Of course. He placed his hat back on his head. I'll come for you at 9 tomorrow morning if that suits, after he left Mrs. Holloway approached with a knowing smile. That man's never shown interest in anything but his ranch and his horses. For him to offer to build a schoolhouse, well, it says something. It says he values education, Madeline replied, unwilling to acknowledge the woman's implication. Perhaps, Mrs. Holloway's eyes twinkled. But I've known Dane Yates for 10 years, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you just now. Madeline dismissed the comment with a wave of her hand. But that night, as she lay in the unfamiliar bed, her thoughts kept returning to the tall cowboy with the serious blue eyes who had offered her an unexpected path forward. True to his word, Dane arrived promptly at 9 the next morning, driving a well-maintained wagon rather than riding his horse. He helped Madeline up to the seat with a strong, calloused hand, then climbed up beside her. It's not a long journey, but the road gets rough in places, he warned as they set off. The May morning was gloriously clear, with wildflowers dotting the landscape and mountains rising majestically in the distance. As they left the town behind, Madeline felt some of her tension ease. Here was the West she had imagined vast and beautiful, full of promise. How long have you lived here, Mr. Yates? She asked, genuinely curious about this man who seemed so at odds with the townspeople she'd encountered. Going on 12 years now. He handled the team of horses with easy confidence. Came out after the war with not much more than the horse I was riding and dreams of something better than what I'd left behind. You fought in the Civil War. That would make him at least in his mid-30s, she calculated. He nodded. Union sighed. I was young, joined up in '63 when I was 18, saw enough to last a lifetime. I'm sorry, she said softly, understanding there were depths of experience there she couldn't begin to fathom. It's long past. His tone discouraged further questions on that subject. What about you? What brings a Boston-educated woman to the New Mexico territory? Madeline considered deflecting the question, but decided honesty was fair. My parents died last year, influenza. They left me enough to complete my education, but little else. When I saw the advertisement for a teacher out west, it seemed providential. "I'm sorry about your parents," he said, his voice gentler than she'd yet heard it. "Thank you." She gazed at the landscape. There was also a broken engagement that made Boston somewhat uncomfortable. He raised an eyebrow but didn't pry. "His loss," he said simply. The conversation flowed more easily after that exchange of personal histories. Dane pointed out landmarks and told her about the region's recent past, the long Spanish history, the brief Mexican period, and the American takeover following the Mexican-American War. He was surprisingly knowledgeable, displaying an education that seemed at odds with his frontier appearance. "You're well informed for a rancher," she observed after he correctly referenced a historical treaty date, his lips quirked in a half-smile. "Don't let the hat fool you, Miss Vance. I read when time allows. Please call me Madeline," she offered impulsively. "If we're to be employer and employee, Miss Vance seems overly formal." "Madeline, then." The way he said her name, with a slight drawl that lengthened the vowels, sent an unexpected warmth through her. They crested a small rise, and suddenly before them lay a sweeping valley. A river snaked through lush grazing land, and nestled near its bank stood a substantial ranch house with several outbuildings. Cattle dotted the distant fields and horses grazed in a nearby corral. "Welcome to the Double Y," Dane said, a note of pride in his voice. As they approached, Madeline began to appreciate the scope of the operation. The main house was larger than she'd expected, a two-story structure built of solid logs with a wide porch. Several men worked around the property, stopping to wave as Dane drove the wagon into the yard. "This is impressive," she admitted. "You've built all this in 12 years. Started with just 40 acres and a handful of cattle," he said. "Now it's over 2,000 acres and 500 head, good years and hard work." He helped her down from the wagon, and as her feet touched the ground, an older Mexican man approached, removing his hat respectfully. "Miss Vance, this is Miguel Diaz, my foreman. Miguel, Miss Vance might be teaching here soon." "A teacher? Here?" Miguel's weathered face broke into a wide smile. "My grandchildren, they will be so happy. My daughter has been teaching them letters, but she has little time with all her work." "How many children do you have in your family, Mr. Diaz?" Madeline asked. "My daughter has 4, ages 6 to 12. And my son has 3 more, the oldest being 14. They live just over that rise." He pointed to a gentle hill to the east. "Close enough to walk here each day. 7 children from just 2 families," Madeline mused, and Mr. Yates mentioned others nearby. "The Johnsons have 3, the Gonzalez family has 5, and there are others scattered about," Dane confirmed. "Let me show you where the schoolhouse would be." He led her to a level area about 100 yards from the main house with a magnificent view of the mountains. "I thought here. Good drainage, protected from the worst winds, and plenty of space for a playground." Madeline tried to envision it, a simple building with rows of desks, windows to catch the light, perhaps a small bell tower. How soon could it be built? "With Miguel and the boys helping, we could have the basic structure up in 2 weeks. Interior work might take another week or 2. He looked at her intently. "Does that mean you're considering my offer?" "I'm still weighing all factors," she said diplomatically. "I'd like to see the cabin where I would stay." He nodded and guided her to a small structure about 50 yards from the main house, far enough for privacy, but close enough for safety. It was a simple one-room cabin with a small porch, currently being used for storage. "It needs work," he acknowledged as they peered through the dusty window. "Fresh paint, proper furnishings, curtains at the windows, but the roof is sound and the walls are tight. It's larger than my room at the boarding house," she observed, "and the view is certainly superior." Next, they visited the main house, which impressed Madeline with its unexpected comforts. Though decidedly masculine in decoration, it featured solid furniture, decent carpets, and bookshelves filled with well-worn volumes. "You have quite a library," she noted, scanning titles that ranged from practical agricultural texts to Shakespeare and Dickens. "Books are hard to come by out here. I never pass up a chance to add to the collection." He seemed almost embarrassed by her attention to this detail. "The hands eat at that table," he added, indicating a long oak table that could seat at least 12. "You'd be welcome to join us, or I could arrange for meals to be brought to your cabin if you prefer." As they continued the tour, Madeline's practical concerns began to fade. The ranch was well established and orderly, with none of the roughness she had feared. Even the bunkhouse, which housed the ranch hands, was clean and reasonably comfortable. After seeing the property, Dane drove her to meet some of the neighboring families whose children would attend the school. The Johnson family, homesteaders trying to establish a farm on difficult terrain, welcomed them enthusiastically, particularly when they learned of Madeline's purpose. "Our Sammy's nearly 10 and can barely write his name," Mrs. Johnson confided. "We try to teach them in the evenings, but after a full day's work, there's little energy left for lessons." The Gonzalez family greeted them next, with 5 curious children peering from behind their mother as Dane explained Madeline's potential role. "You would teach our children." "They would be welcome," Senora Gonzalez asked, hope and skepticism mingling in her voice. "Every child deserves education," Madeline replied firmly. "I would be honored to teach them." By the time they headed back to town in the late afternoon, Madeline had met 15 potential students and their parents. All had expressed eager support for the school, though several had admitted they would need to balance education against the practical needs of their farms and households. The younger children could come daily, Dane suggested as they traveled. The older ones perhaps 3 days a week, especially during planting and harvest times. Madeline nodded, her mind already organizing curriculum and scheduling possibilities. "It could work," she admitted. "Though supplies would be a challenge. Books, slates, chalk. I'll place an order with the mercantile tomorrow," Dane promised. "Whatever you need." "Mr. Yates Dane," she corrected herself. "This is a significant investment you're proposing. The building supplies my salary." "Why is this so important to you?" He was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "I grew up in Tennessee, son of a tenant farmer, never learned to read until I was 15 when a traveling preacher took an interest in me. By then, I'd already missed so much. During the war, I saw how the men who could read letters from home, write to their families, understand written orders, they had advantages I didn't." He glanced at her before returning his attention to the road. "When I came west after the war, I promised myself I'd learn everything I could. Books became my teachers, but it shouldn't be that hard. These children deserve better than hoping they'll stumble across someone willing to teach them when they're already half grown." The sincerity in his voice moved her deeply. "That's a noble purpose," she said softly. "Nothing noble about it, just practical. Education changes what's possible." He cleared his throat. "Have you decided? Will you take the position?" Madeline looked out at the land passing by, rugged, challenging, but beautiful in its own way. Not so different from the man beside her, she reflected. "Yes," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "I'll do it, on one condition." "Name it." "I want a contract, just as I would have had with the town. Terms clearly stated, expectations outlined for both parties." He nodded approvingly. "Smart. I'll have it drawn up tomorrow. When would you like to start? How soon can the cabin be ready?" "I'll need somewhere to live while the schoolhouse is being built. Give me 3 days to get it properly cleaned and furnished," he said. "Would that work?" 3 days, she agreed. "That should give me time to obtain whatever personal items I'll need and prepare initial lessons." As they approached town, Madeline felt a curious mixture of trepidation and excitement. She was venturing into something unconventional, potentially scandalous by Eastern standards. Yet it felt more right than anything had since she'd received that letter from Las Vegas months ago. "I should warn you," Dane said as they neared the boarding house. "The town won't approve. Taking this position might close doors for you here." Madeline laughed, the sound surprising both of them. "Those doors are already firmly shut, Mr. Yates. I have nothing to lose." His answering smile transformed his serious face. Then welcome to the Double Y, Madeline Vance. I believe we're about to scandalize Las Vegas, New Mexico territory. I believe we are, she agreed, and found she didn't mind the prospect at all. 3 days later, Madeline stood on the porch of her newly refurbished cabin, watching as Dane and his men unloaded the wagon containing her few belongings, plus several new items he had purchased to make the space comfortable. Inside, the cabin had been transformed. Fresh paint brightened the walls, new curtains hung at the windows, and simple but sturdy furniture created a cozy living space. A cast iron stove would provide heat in winter, and shelves held a small collection of books, a housewarming gift from her new employer. "It's perfect," she told Dane as he carried in her trunk. "Far better than I expected." "Senora Diaz deserves most of the credit," he admitted. "She has a good eye for making a place comfortable." The older woman had indeed worked wonders, adding touches that made the cabin feel like a home, a colorful rag rug by the bed, dried flowers in a pottery vase, even a handmade quilt folded at the foot of the bed. "I should thank her properly," Madeline said. "Everyone has been so welcoming." They're excited about the school. Work started on the foundation this morning. Indeed, Madeline could hear the sounds of labor from the construction site, men calling to each other, the rhythmic pounding of hammers, the scrape of shovels digging post holes. Already the outlines of the schoolhouse were taking shape on the ground. "I still can hardly believe how quickly this is happening," she marveled. "Out here, when something needs doing, you don't wait around." Dane set her trunk at the foot of the bed. "Is there anything else you need?" "No, this is more than sufficient." She hesitated, then added, "Thank you, Dane, for everything." "Don't thank me yet," he warned with a half-smile. "You haven't tasted the cooking in the main house." Cookie's been with me for years, but his biscuits could build a foundation nearly as solid as the one going in for your schoolhouse. She laughed, already feeling more at ease than she had since arriving in the territory. "I look forward to the challenge." That evening, Madeline joined the men for supper in the main house, an experience both intimidating and oddly heartwarming. The ranch hands 8 in total, ranging from grizzled veterans to a boy barely out of his teens, treated her with awkward respect, clearly unused to female company at their table. Conversation was stilted at first, but as the meal progressed, the atmosphere relaxed. Dane sat at the head of the table, occasionally steering the discussion when it veered toward topics he deemed unsuitable for mixed company. Madeline found his protective instinct charming rather than offensive, especially as it became clear the men respected him deeply without fearing him. After the meal, as the hands drifted out to enjoy pipes on the porch or early retirement to the bunkhouse, Dane invited Madeline to stay for coffee in what he called the library, a comfortable room lined with bookshelves. "I thought you might like to see what books are available," he explained, pouring coffee into delicate cups that seemed incongruous in his large hands. "For your teaching, I mean." Madeline explored the shelves with delight, finding volumes of history, literature, mathematics, and natural sciences. "These would be excellent resources," she said, running her fingers along the spine of a geography text, "though I'll still need basic primers for the youngest children." "I've ordered some," Dane replied. "Along with slates, chalk, and paper. They should arrive on next week's stage." "You're very thorough." She accepted the coffee cup he offered. "I try to anticipate needs." He settled into a leather chair opposite hers. "It's necessary when you're responsible for a spread this size. How many acres did you say you have now?" "Just over 2,000, though not all is good grazing land." He gazed into the fireplace, where a small fire took the edge off the cool evening. "I started with 40 acres and a dream. Each year I've added a bit more, some purchased, some through land grants when I could prove improvements." "It's impressive," she said sincerely. "You've built something substantial here. It's a start." His eyes met hers. "A man wants something to leave behind, something that matters." The intensity of his gaze made her heart flutter unexpectedly. Madeline quickly returned to the bookshelves, needing physical distance from the sudden awareness between them. I should examine these more carefully tomorrow, she said, pulling a volume of American history from the shelf. I'll need to assess what level would be appropriate for each student. Of course. Dane seemed to sense her retreat and respected it. You must be tired after the move. I should see you safely to your cabin. Outside, the night was clear and cool, stars blazing in a velvet sky unlike anything Madeline had seen in Boston. Dane walked beside her, carrying a lantern that cast a golden glow on the path. The stars are magnificent here, she said, tilting her head back to admire the heavens. One of the first things I noticed when I came west, he agreed, looking up. Makes a man feel small, all that vastness. But not in a bad way, just puts things in perspective. At her cabin door, he handed her the lantern. Sleep well, Madeline. Tomorrow you can observe the schoolhouse construction if you like, or simply settle in. Sunday, I thought you might want to meet with some of the parents and children, perhaps assess their current abilities. That would be perfect. Thank you for thinking of it. He tipped his hat and turned to go, then hesitated. I'm glad you're here, he said simply. Good night. Madeline watched him walk back toward the main house, his tall figure gradually disappearing into the darkness. Inside her cabin, she lit the lamp and sat on the edge of her bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the magnitude of the changes in her life. 1 week ago, she'd been on a stagecoach heading west with clear expectations about her future. Now she found herself living alone on a cattle ranch, preparing to teach in a schoolhouse that didn't yet exist, employed by a man who unsettled her in ways she hadn't anticipated. What would Mother think? She whispered to the empty room and couldn't help but smile at the imagined horror on her proper Bostonian mother's face. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Madeline divided her time between observing the rapidly rising schoolhouse, meeting with potential students and their families, and developing a curriculum that would accommodate varying ages and abilities. Meanwhile, Dane was a constant presence, overseeing the construction while still managing his ranching operations. The schoolhouse took shape with impressive speed. A simple rectangular building with a pitched roof, it featured large windows to maximize natural light and a small covered porch at the entrance. Inside, Dane had planned for rows of bench desks, a larger desk for the teacher, and a blackboard spanning one wall. What do you think? He asked one afternoon as they stood inside the partially completed structure. Will it serve your needs? Madeline turned slowly, taking in the spacious room with its high ceiling and abundant light. It's wonderful, she said sincerely. Better than many schoolhouses I've seen back east. Pride flickered across his face. I want to do this right. These children deserve the best we can give them. She was struck again by his commitment to a project that offered him no direct benefit. It's admirable, the investment you're making in their future. He shrugged, seemingly uncomfortable with the praise. Education opens doors. These kids shouldn't have fewer opportunities just because they live outside town. As they left the building, Miguel approached with news that required Dane's immediate attention: a problem with water rights at the northern boundary of the property. He excused himself, leaving Madeline to make her own way back to her cabin. Instead of returning immediately, she decided to walk along the small stream that flowed near the ranch buildings, enjoying the late spring sunshine and the wildflowers that dotted the banks. She had gone perhaps a quarter mile when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Turning, she saw Dane riding toward her, his expression unusually tight. He dismounted and approached on foot, leading his horse. I'm sorry to interrupt your walk, he said, but we may have a problem. Mayor Wilkins and Pastor Roberts just rode onto the property. They've requested to speak with both of us. Madeline felt a flutter of anxiety. What do they want? They didn't say, but I can guess. His jaw tightened. Word has spread about the school. Apparently, the town council is concerned about what they're calling unauthorized education on my land. Can they stop us, legally? No, this is private property and what we do here is our business, he hesitated. But they can make things difficult. The Double Y depends on good relations with Las Vegas for supplies, services, and selling our cattle. Madeline straightened her shoulders. Then we should hear what they have to say. They walked back together, an unexpected tension between them. At the main house, Mayor Wilkins and Pastor Roberts waited on the porch, their expressions grave. "Mayor, Pastor," Dane greeted them coolly. "What brings you out to the Double Y?" Mayor Wilkins shifted uncomfortably. "Dane, we've known each other a long time. I've always respected how you run your operation." "I sense there's a but coming," Dane replied evenly. But, the mayor continued, "this matter of establishing a school here, employing Miss Vance after the town council explicitly decided against her. It's created quite a stir in Las Vegas. I wasn't aware I needed the town's permission to hire help on my own property." Dane's voice remained calm, but Madeline noticed his hands clench slightly. Pastor Roberts stepped forward, his manner more conciliatory. "Of course you don't, Dane, but surely you understand our concern. Miss Vance will be teaching not only your ranch hands children, but others from surrounding properties. Without proper oversight, without a curriculum approved by the Territorial Education Board, my curriculum follows the standard Boston model," Madeline interjected. "The same used in schools throughout the territories." "Miss Vance," the pastor acknowledged her with a nod, "our concern isn't just about academic content but about moral and spiritual guidance. A school should reinforce the values of the community." "Which community would that be, Pastor?" Dane asked pointedly. "The one in town that refused to educate half the children in the area because their parents speak Spanish, or work too far out to make the daily journey, or can't afford proper town clothes for their kids," the mayor flushed. "That's not fair, Dane. Resources are limited, which is why I'm providing my own resources," Dane cut in. "My land, my money, my building materials. And a young, unmarried woman living unchaperoned on a ranch full of men," the mayor said bluntly. "What kind of example does that set for impressionable children?" Madeline felt heat rise to her face, partly from embarrassment but mostly from anger. "I assure you, my conduct is beyond reproach. My living arrangements are entirely proper with my own separate quarters." "I'm sure you believe that, Miss Vance," Pastor Roberts said condescendingly, "but perception matters as much as reality." "Already there's talk in town, there's always talk in town," Dane interrupted sharply. "Most of it not worth listening to." The conversation continued in this vein, growing increasingly tense. The town representatives made veiled threats about social ostracism and economic consequences, while Dane remained steadfast in his position that what happened on his property was his business alone. Finally, the mayor made one last appeal. "Dane, be reasonable. If you're determined to have a school, at least let the town council approve a suitable teacher. Perhaps a married couple, or Miss Vance is the teacher I've hired and she's staying," Dane stated flatly. "Now, if you gentlemen have nothing else to discuss, I have a ranch to run." After the visitors departed, an uncomfortable silence fell between Dane and Madeline. She was the first to break it. "Perhaps I should reconsider my position," she said quietly. "I don't want to cause problems for you or the Double Y." Dane's expression softened as he turned to her. "Madeline, I meant what I said. I want you here. The children need you. Don't let their narrow-mindedness drive you away. But if they make trouble for your business, let me worry about that." His eyes held her steadily. "Unless you want to leave, if you're uncomfortable with the situation, I understand." Madeline considered the question seriously. The confrontation had been unpleasant, and the implied criticism of her character stung. Yet the thought of abandoning the school and Dane felt worse. "No," she said finally. "I don't want to leave. I believe in what we're doing here." Relief washed over his face. "Good, so do I." He hesitated, then added, "But there's something I should tell you, something that might help explain the town's reaction." He led her to the porch chairs, and they sat facing the distant mountains as the sun began its descent. 5 years ago, there was another teacher in Las Vegas, Dane began. A young woman named Rebecca Allen. She came from Philadelphia with impressive credentials and progressive ideas. The town hired her, excited to have someone with her qualifications interested in such a remote posting. He paused, his expression darkening. She was brilliant by all accounts. Started a lending library, organized adult education classes in the evenings. But she also had ideas that challenged the established order. She taught Mexican children alongside white children, advocated for women's suffrage, questioned certain religious teachings. "I imagine that didn't go over well," Madeline murmured. "It didn't. There were complaints, arguments at town meetings, but she had supporters, two people who saw the good she was doing." He stared into the distance. Then she became involved with a local rancher. A man with a reputation for being difficult, unconventional. The relationship caused a scandal. What happened to her? Dane's jaw tightened. The town council dismissed her, cited moral turpitude, unsuitable influence on children. She left the territory as far as I know. And the rancher? He stayed, had too much invested to leave. Dane's voice had gone flat. But he never forgot the lesson. Las Vegas protects what it considers proper, even at the expense of progress. Madeline studied his profile, understanding dawning. "It was you," she said softly. "You were the rancher." He nodded once, still not looking at her. "I wanted you to know. It's part of why the town was so quick to reject you and why they're particularly concerned about you being here at the Double Y. Were you in love with her?" The question slipped out before she could consider its propriety. Now he did turn to her, surprise evident in his eyes. "I thought I was at the time, looking back. We were both lonely, both outsiders in our own ways." His expression softened with memory. "Rebecca was a force of nature, passionate about education, about changing the world. I admired that." Madeline felt a twinge of something she didn't want to identify as jealousy. "Thank you for telling me. It helps me understand the situation better." "I don't want the past to repeat itself," Dane said carefully. "The school is too important. Your reputation is already compromised simply by my being here," she pointed out. "We may as well do the good work we've set out to do, regardless of what the town thinks." He studied her for a long moment. "You're not what I expected, Madeline Vance. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" She asked, attempting lightness. "Definitely good," he replied, his gaze warm enough to make her heart skip. "Definitely good." The schoolhouse was completed by the first week of June, a plain but solid structure that stood proudly on the gentle rise Dane had selected. A small bell tower crowned the roof, housing a brass bell donated by one of the neighboring ranchers. Inside, wooden desks arranged in neat rows faced a larger teacher's desk and the promised blackboard. Shelves along one wall held the books and supplies Dane had ordered, supplemented by donations from families eager to support the endeavor. On the Sunday before classes were to begin, Dane organized an informal gathering for all the families whose children would attend. Tables were set up outside the schoolhouse, laden with food contributed by every household. Nearly 60 people came, parents, children, and even a few grandparents, representing the diverse community surrounding the Double Y. Madeline moved among them, greeting each child by name, having made it a point to meet every student beforehand. There would be 22 pupils in total, ranging from 6-year-old Alina Diaz to 16-year-old Thomas Johnson, who would attend only 3 days a week to help his father with farm work the other days. Miss Vance. 8-year-old Sarah Johnson tugged at her skirt. "Will we learn to read real books?" "Absolutely," Madeline promised, crouching to the child's level. "And write stories of your own, too." "I want to learn numbers," declared Sarah's brother Matthew. "Pa says if I can cipher good enough, I can help with the accounts next year." Dane approached as the children scampered off to play. "You've made quite an impression already," he observed, handing her a cup of lemonade. "I haven't seen the children this excited since last Christmas." "They're eager to learn," she replied, gratefully accepting the cool drink. "It's a teacher's dream." "You seem happy," he said, studying her face. "I am," and it was true, she realized. Despite the unconventional circumstances, despite the town's disapproval, she felt more purposeful and alive than she had in years. "This is where I'm meant to be." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around his eyes, a slight parting of his lips as if he might say something significant. But Miguel called him away to help with the barbecue, breaking the moment. Throughout the afternoon, Madeline was struck by the sense of community among these diverse families. Mexican ranchers conversed with Anglo farmers, their children playing together without regard for background or language. This, she thought, was the true promise of the West, not the conquest of land, but the creation of something new from disparate elements. As the celebration wound down and families began to depart, Madeline stood on the schoolhouse porch, watching the sunset paint the landscape in gold and crimson. Dane joined her, standing close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" "For this." She gestured to the schoolhouse, the departing families, the entire scene, for believing in education enough to create all this. "I just provided the land and materials," he demurred. "You're the one who will make it matter." "We make a good team then," she said, daring to meet his eyes directly. His gaze held hers for a long moment. "Yes," he agreed softly, "we do." The first day of school arrived clear and warm. Madeline rose before dawn, too excited to sleep, and prepared herself with special care. She chose her most professional dress, navy blue with white collar and cuffs, and pinned her hair in a neat bun at the nape of her neck. After a quick breakfast, she gathered her materials and walked to the schoolhouse, arriving a full hour before the first students were expected. The morning light streamed through the eastern windows as she arranged her desk, checked that the blackboard was clean, and reviewed her lesson plans one final time. When she heard the first wagon approaching, her heart quickened with anticipation. The Diaz children arrived first, followed quickly by the Johnsons and then others in a steady stream. By 9 o'clock, all 22 pupils were seated at their desks, faces shining with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. "Good morning, children," Madeline began, looking out at the rows of expectant faces. "Welcome to your first day of school." She spent the morning assessing each child's abilities, dividing them into groups based on their current knowledge rather than strictly by age. Some of the older children who had received sporadic education previously were placed together, while others needed to start with basic reading and arithmetic. By midday, when the children broke for lunch outside under the trees, Madeline had a clearer picture of the task before her. It would be challenging to meet such diverse needs, but she felt equal to the challenge. As the children ate their packed lunches, Madeline noticed Dane watching from a distance, leaning against the corral fence. Their eyes met briefly, and he tipped his hat in acknowledgement before returning to his work. The afternoon passed quickly, and before Madeline knew it, it was time to dismiss her pupils. She rang the bell, feeling a surge of satisfaction as the children gathered their belongings and filed out with cheerful goodbyes. "How was your first day?" Dane asked, appearing in the doorway after the last child had departed. "Wonderful," she replied honestly. "Exhausting, but wonderful. These children are so eager to learn. They're lucky to have you." He stepped inside, looking around the now empty room. "I saw you teaching from my corral. You looked in your element." "I was." She smiled, gathering papers from her desk. "This is what I was trained to do, what I love doing." "I'm glad." He hesitated, then added, "I was thinking, would you join me for supper tonight, not with the hands, but just us, in the house, to celebrate your first day?" The invitation surprised her, carrying implications she wasn't sure she was ready to acknowledge. "That sounds lovely," she heard herself say. "Thank you. 7 o'clock, I'll have Cookie prepare something special. 7 is perfect. I'll need time to prepare tomorrow's lessons anyway." After he left, Madeline sat at her desk, trying to calm her racing heart. It was just a meal, she told herself. A collegial celebration of the school's opening day. Nothing more, yet as she changed into her best dress that evening, a forest green that brought out the gold flecks in her hazel eyes, she knew she was deceiving herself. There had been something in Dane's invitation that went beyond professional courtesy, and her eager acceptance revealed her own feelings more clearly than she cared to admit. Dinner was served in the dining room of the main house, a space Madeline hadn't seen used before. A polished oak table dominated the room, set with fine china and silver that seemed incongruous in a frontier ranch house. Candles provided most of the illumination, casting a warm glow over the scene. "This is unexpected," she commented as Dane held her chair. "I had no idea the double Y could be so formal." "My mother's influence," he explained, taking his seat opposite her. "She insisted I bring a few civilized touches west with me, said a man needed reminders of better things or he'd forget what he was working toward. Your mother sounds wise." "She was." A shadow crossed his face. "She died before I purchased this land, but I like to think she would have approved." Cookie served a meal that surpassed anything Madeline had eaten since leaving Boston tender roast beef, fresh vegetables from the kitchen garden, and a berry pie that would have won prizes at any county fair. Dane proved to be an attentive host and engaging conversationalist, asking thoughtful questions about her first day of teaching and sharing amusing anecdotes about his early days in the territory. As they lingered over coffee, a comfortable silence fell between them. Madeline found herself studying his face in the candlelight, the strong lines of his jaw, the tiny creases at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he smiled, the unexpected gentleness in his expression when he looked at her. "Dane," she said finally, setting down her cup. "May I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Why haven't you married? You've built all this," she gestured to encompass the ranch, "but you've chosen to do it alone." He considered the question carefully before answering. "There haven't been many opportunities out here, for one thing. Suitable women are scarce in frontier territories. But surely in 10 years, there must have been some possibilities. Las Vegas may be small, but it's not devoid of unmarried women." A wry smile touched his lips. "The kind of women who would consider marrying a rancher like me. They want certain things. Security, respectability, a comfortable home. I could provide those material comforts, but the rest." He shrugged. "I've never been particularly concerned with following conventions or fitting in with town society. That makes me a poor prospect for most women looking to settle down." "And Rebecca?" Madeline asked softly. "Rebecca wanted adventure, not permanence." His eyes held a distant look. "We were good together in many ways, but neither of us was thinking of forever." He shifted his gaze back to her. "What about you? You mentioned a broken engagement." Madeline traced the rim of her coffee cup with one finger. "His name was William. He taught at the same school where I completed my training. Everyone thought we were perfectly suited, similar backgrounds, shared interests in education and literature. But when my parents died and my circumstances changed, so did his feelings, or perhaps they were revealed more clearly." She attempted a smile that didn't quite succeed. "He needed a wife with financial security, family connections that could advance his career. I suddenly had neither." "He sounds like a fool," Dane said flatly. "He was practical," she corrected, "just not very honest with me or himself about what mattered to him." "And what matters to you, Madeline?" His voice had lowered, his eyes intent on her face. She met his gaze steadily. "Honesty, purpose, making a difference in the lives of others." She hesitated, then added, "and being valued for who I am, not what I can provide. Those seem like worthy priorities to me." He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers briefly. "And for what it's worth, I think you've found a place where you can achieve all of those things." The touch, light as it was, sent warmth spiraling through her. "I believe I have," she agreed softly. Later, as he walked her back to her cabin under a sky blazing with stars, Madeline felt a sense of contentment she hadn't experienced in years. At her door, Dane paused, seemingly reluctant to end the evening. "Thank you for dinner," she said. "It was lovely." "The first of many, I hope." His voice carried a question. "I would like that." He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat of him in the cool night air. "Madeline," the sound of hoofbeats interrupted whatever he had been about to say. They both turned to see a rider approaching at speed, one of the ranch hands calling Dane's name urgently. "Boss, there's trouble at the North Pasture. Rustlers hit the new stock." Dane's expression hardened instantly. "How many taken?" "Can't tell yet. Peterson and Martinez are tracking them now." "Get 3 more men and meet me at the stables in 5 minutes." As the hand galloped away, Dane turned back to Madeline, regret evident in his face. "I'm sorry, I have to go." "Of course," she said, trying to hide her disappointment. "Be careful, always am." He hesitated, then quickly brought her hand to his lips. "Good night, Madeline." She watched him stride away, feeling the ghostly impression of his lips on her skin long after he had disappeared into the darkness. The next morning, Madeline rose early, hoping to catch Dane before school began to learn what had happened with the rustlers. But when she emerged from her cabin, Miguel informed her that Dane and several hands were still out tracking the stolen cattle and weren't expected back until evening at the earliest. "Is it dangerous?" she asked, unable to keep concern from her voice. Miguel's weathered face grew serious. "Cattle thieves are desperate men, Miss Vance, but the boss knows how to handle himself. He was a lawman for a time, did you know that? After the war, before he came here." This was news to Madeline. "No, he never mentioned it. 2 years with the Texas Rangers." Miguel nodded proudly. "He doesn't talk about it much, but there are stories. The boss is not a man to cross." This glimpse of Dane's past added another layer to the complex man she was coming to know. It explained certain things: his quiet confidence in difficult situations, the respect tinged with caution that most men showed him, the way he carried himself as if always alert to potential danger. School that day proceeded normally, though Madeline found her thoughts frequently straying to Dane and the potential confrontation he might be facing miles away. She forced herself to focus on her pupils, channeling her nervous energy into more animated lessons that left the children wide-eyed with enthusiasm. It was nearly midnight when she heard horses returning to the ranch. Unable to resist, she wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped onto her porch, peering toward the main house where lanterns now blazed. She could make out several men dismounting, including Dane's tall figure. Relief washed through her, followed by embarrassment at the intensity of her reaction. She had known this man barely a month, yet his safety had become vitally important to her. As she turned to go back inside, movement caught her eye. Dane was walking toward her cabin. She stepped fully onto the porch, waiting as he approached. "I'm sorry if I woke you," he said, stopping at the foot of the steps. In the moonlight, she could see the exhaustion etched on his face and the dust coating his clothing. "You didn't. I heard the horses." She pulled her shawl tighter against the night chill. "Did you find your cattle?" "Most of them. The thieves abandoned them when they realized we were closing in." A muscle twitched in his jaw. "They got away, though, this time. Were you in danger?" The question slipped out before she could censor it. His expression softened. "Were you worried about me, Madeline?" "Of course I was," she admitted. "Miguel told me you were once a Texas Ranger. A lifetime ago." He ran a hand through his hair, dislodging trail dust. "I should let you get back to sleep. I just wanted to see you to apologize for how our evening ended." "There's nothing to apologize for. Your responsibility is to the ranch." "I have other responsibilities too." His voice had dropped lower. "Other things that matter to me." The intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "Dane, I should go," he interrupted himself. "You have school tomorrow and I'm half dead on my feet." "Yes, you should rest." She hesitated, then added softly, "I'm glad you're safe." He nodded once, his eyes never leaving hers. "Good night, Madeline." "Good night, Dane." As June turned to July, life at the Double Y settled into a pleasant rhythm. Each weekday, Madeline taught in the schoolhouse, watching with satisfaction as her pupils made rapid progress. Evenings were often spent preparing lessons, reading on her porch, or occasionally joining Dane for private dinners that grew increasingly meaningful. Weekends brought community gatherings, picnics by the river, an Independence Day celebration with homemade fireworks that delighted the children, Sunday services led by traveling preachers when available. Through it all, Madeline's relationship with Dane deepened. They rarely spoke directly of their growing feelings, but the connection between them was evident to everyone at the ranch. His gaze followed her whenever she was near, and she found herself constantly aware of his presence, her body attuned to him in ways that both thrilled and unsettled her. On a warm evening in mid-July, Dane invited her for a ride to show her a part of the property she hadn't yet seen. He helped her mount a gentle mare named Daisy, then led the way on his chestnut gelding, following a narrow trail that wound through cottonwood groves along the river. "It's beautiful here," Madeline commented, admiring the way sunlight filtered through the leaves, dappling the ground with golden patterns. "Wait until you see where we're going," Dane promised. After 20 minutes of riding, they emerged from the trees into a hidden meadow ringed by rocky outcroppings. Wildflowers carpeted the ground in a riot of color, and a small stream cut through one corner, creating a natural pool before continuing on its way. "Oh!" Madeline exclaimed, genuinely stunned by the beauty of the place. "This is magnificent." Dane dismounted and helped her down, his hands lingering at her waist slightly longer than necessary. "I found this place my first week on the land. It's been my private sanctuary ever since." "I can see why. It feels magical somehow." She walked through the knee-high grass, bending occasionally to examine particularly striking flowers. "I've never brought anyone else here," he said quietly. Madeline turned to face him, understanding the significance of his admission. "Thank you for sharing it with me." He nodded, then spread a blanket he'd brought in his saddlebag. "I thought we might have a picnic if you're hungry." They sat together, sharing bread, cheese, and dried fruit, talking easily about the school, the ranch, books they'd both read. As the sun began to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the meadow, the conversation turned more personal. "Do you miss Boston?" Dane asked, leaning back on his elbows, his face tilted toward the warmth of the fading sunlight. Madeline considered the question. "I miss certain things, museums, bookshops, concerts, but not as much as I expected to." She smiled ruefully. "That probably sounds frivolous to someone who's lived out here for years." "Not at all. Culture matters. It's one of the things I've tried to maintain even out here." He gestured toward the distant mountains. "This country has its own kind of beauty, its own music and art. It's different but no less valuable." "That's a surprisingly philosophical perspective for a cattle rancher," she teased gently. "There you go again, making assumptions about ranchers," he replied with mock severity. "We're not all illiterate brutes, you know. I never thought you were." Her voice grew serious. "You're one of the most thoughtful men I've ever known, Dane." He sat up, his eyes searching her face. "And you, Madeline Vance, are the most remarkable woman I've ever met." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken feelings. Madeline's heart hammered in her chest as Dane reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers brushing her cheek. "Madeline," he said softly, "I know it hasn't been long, but I think you know how I feel about you." "I think I do," she whispered, unable to look away from his intense gaze. "I've tried to be patient, to give you time to be sure of your own feelings. But I find myself thinking about you every waking moment." He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "When I built that schoolhouse, I thought I was doing it for the children. Now I wonder if I wasn't building it for you, even before I knew you existed." "Dane, let me finish, please." He took a deep breath. "I know this isn't what you came west for. Teaching was your dream, not falling in love with a rough-edged rancher. And I know what people in town are saying about you being here." "If that matters to you, it doesn't," she interrupted firmly. "What others think has never mattered less to me than it does now." Hope flared in his eyes. "Then, is it possible, could you consider a future here, not just as the schoolteacher but as something more?" Madeline's throat tightened with emotion. "I already am," she admitted. "Considering that future, I mean, when I think about leaving the double Y, about leaving you, I can't imagine it. I don't want to imagine it." With aching slowness, Dane leaned forward until his lips were just inches from hers. "May I?" he murmured. In answer, Madeline closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his. The kiss began tentatively, a gentle exploration, but quickly deepened as months of suppressed longing surfaced. His arms encircled her, drawing her closer, while her hands found their way to his shoulders, solid and steady beneath her touch. When they finally parted, both were breathing rapidly. Dane rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if memorizing the moment. "I love you, Madeline," he said simply. "I think I have since the moment I saw you standing outside the mayor's office, too proud to accept defeat." "I love you too," she replied, the words feeling both momentous and utterly natural, though I tried very hard not to at first. He chuckled, pulling back to see her face. "Did you? Why? Because falling in love with you complicated everything. My position, my independence, my plans." She smiled. "But you have a way of overriding sensible plans, Daniel Yates. I'll take that as a compliment." He kissed her again, briefly but tenderly. "We should head back. It'll be dark soon, and as much as I'd like to stay here with you forever, I value your reputation too much to risk it." As they rode back to the ranch in the gathering twilight, Madeline felt as though she were floating, her body still tingling from his kisses, her heart full of newfound certainty. Whatever came next, she knew she had found her home not just in a place, but in a person. News of their courtship spread quickly through the ranch and surrounding properties. Most reactions were positive. The Diaz family particularly seemed delighted, with Miguel going so far as to slap Dane on the back with congratulations, as if an engagement had already been announced. The ranch hands maintained a respectful distance, but couldn't hide their approving grins when Dane and Madeline were seen together. In town, however, the reaction was predictably negative. Reports filtered back through ranch workers who visited Las Vegas for supplies. The schoolteacher was living in sin with the rancher. She was corrupting the children with immoral example. The school was a front for inappropriate activities. Mayor Wilkins made it clear that neither Dane nor Madeline would be welcome at town social functions. "Does it bother you?" Dane asked one evening as they sat on the porch of the main house, watching the sunset. "Being ostracized by the town, honestly? No." Madeline rested her head against his shoulder. "I've found more acceptance here, among people the town considers outsiders, than I ever would have found there." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Still, it's not fair to you. A respectable teacher shouldn't have to endure such gossip." "I'm more than just a teacher now," she reminded him. "I'm a woman in love. That changes one's priorities." August brought sweltering heat that made the schoolhouse stifling by midday. Dane arranged for additional windows to be cut into the western wall and installed canvas awnings that could be adjusted to block the direct sun while allowing breezes to circulate. The improvements made the building more comfortable, but Madeline still dismissed her pupils early on the hottest days, allowing them to continue their studies under the shade of nearby trees. On one such afternoon, as the last child departed with parents who had come to collect them, Madeline looked up to find a stranger approaching the schoolhouse, a well-dressed woman perhaps 10 years her senior, driving a smart buggy. "Miss Vance," the woman called, pulling her vehicle to a stop. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," Madeline replied, curious about this unexpected visitor. "School has just dismissed for the day." The woman climbed down from the buggy with practiced grace. "My name is Alina Harrington. My husband owns the Mercantile in Las Vegas." Madeline tensed slightly, wondering if this was another emissary from town come to express disapproval. "How can I help you, Mrs. Harrington?" "Actually, I hope I might help you." The woman smiled, revealing a warmth Madeline hadn't expected. "I've heard about your school from several sources. Most recently from Sofia Gonzalez, who cleans for me twice weekly. She says her children have learned more in 2 months with you than in years of sporadic lessons elsewhere." "That's very kind of her," Madeline said cautiously. "It made me curious." You see, I've been advocating for improved education in Las Vegas for years with limited success. The council is resistant to change. I've noticed, Madeline replied dryly. Alina laughed, a genuine sound that eased some of Madeline's tension. Yes, I imagine you have. May I see your schoolroom? I'd like to understand what you're doing here that has made such an impression. Madeline led her visitor inside, explaining her teaching philosophy and methods as they toured the simple space. Alina asked insightful questions about the curriculum and expressed particular interest in how Madeline managed students of different ages and abilities simultaneously. This is impressive, she said finally, especially with such limited resources. Mr. Yates has been extremely generous in providing what we need, Madeline replied, so I've heard. Alina's expression grew thoughtful. There are rumors in town, of course, about your relationship with Dane. Madeline stiffened. If you've come to, I haven't come to judge, Alina interrupted gently. Quite the opposite. I wanted to meet you myself to form my own opinion without the filter of town gossip. And what opinion have you formed, Mrs. Harrington? That you are exactly what these children need, Alina replied promptly. A dedicated educator with progressive methods and genuine care for your students. She hesitated. And that whatever exists between you and Dane Yates is your business, not the town's. Surprised by this unexpected support, Madeline smiled. Thank you, that's refreshing to hear. I'm not alone in my thinking, Alina continued. There are others in Las Vegas who question the council's decision to reject you, especially now that word has spread about your success here. Really? This was news to Madeline. Really? In fact, I'm here partly as an informal representative of several families with school-age children. We're wondering if you might consider taking additional students' town children whose parents are willing to transport them here daily. Madeline blinked in surprise. You want town children to attend my school, even knowing the council disapproves? Especially knowing that, Alina said with a hint of mischief. Some of us believe it's time Las Vegas embraced more progressive thinking. Education seems a good place to start. The proposal was unexpected but intriguing. I would need to discuss this with Mr. Yates, Madeline said. It's his property after all, of course, and there would be practical considerations: transportation, additional space if needed. How many children are we discussing? Initially, perhaps 8 or 10. If it proves successful, possibly more. Madeline's mind raced with the possibilities. Expanding the school would legitimize it in ways the council couldn't easily dismiss. It would also increase her workload significantly. I'll speak with Mr. Yates this evening, she promised. Perhaps you could return tomorrow afternoon for our answer. That would be perfect. Alina extended her hand. Thank you for considering it, Miss Vance. Whatever you decide, I'm glad to have met you. After Alina departed, Madeline sat at her desk, mind whirling with this unexpected development. When Dane arrived an hour later for their usual end-of-day conversation, she explained the visitor and her proposal. Town families want to send their children here, he repeated, clearly surprised. Against the council's wishes? Apparently not everyone in Las Vegas shares the council's opinion, Madeline replied. Mrs. Harrington seemed quite sincere and quite determined. Dane paced the length of the schoolroom, considering. It would change things. The school would become more visible, more political, I know. If you'd rather not involve the double Y in town disputes, I completely understand. He stopped pacing and turned to her, his expression resolute. No, this is exactly what should happen. Education shouldn't be limited by arbitrary boundaries or petty politics. A slow smile spread across his face. Besides, I rather like the idea of the town having to admit they were wrong about you. Is that your only motivation? She teased. Proving the council wrong. He crossed to her and took her hands, pulling her to her feet. No, my primary motivation is supporting the woman I love in doing what she does best, teaching children, regardless of where they come from or who their parents are. Madeline reached up to touch his face, love welling within her. Thank you, Dane, for everything. He caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "There is one condition, though." "What's that? If we're going to expand the school, make it more permanent. I think it's time we discussed making other things permanent as well." Her heart quickened as his meaning became clear. "Dane, marry me, Madeline," he said simply. "Be my wife, my partner in everything, the ranch, the school, life." Joy bubbled up inside her, so intense it almost felt like pain. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, I'll marry you." His answering smile was brilliant as he gathered her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in an exuberant embrace before setting her down to kiss her properly, a kiss that promised a lifetime of love and partnership. When Alina Harrington returned the next day, she found not only her proposal accepted, but was also among the first to congratulate the newly engaged couple. Plans were quickly made to expand the school capacity before the fall term began, with Dane offering to add an extension to the existing building. Word of both developments, the engagement and the school expansion, spread rapidly through the area. The reactions from town were mixed, with the council initially threatening legal action to prevent town children from attending an unauthorized school. But when several prominent citizens, including Alina's husband and the town's only doctor, publicly supported the Double Y school, the council reluctantly backed down. By September, the schoolhouse had nearly doubled in size, and student enrollment had grown to 36 children, including a dozen from Las Vegas proper. Madeline hired an assistant, Emily Johnson, the eldest daughter of one of the homesteading families, who showed a natural aptitude for teaching. The arrangement allowed Madeline to split the students into more manageable groups based on ability, and gave Emily valuable experience she could use to pursue formal teacher training in the future. Meanwhile, wedding plans progressed. Madeline and Dane decided on a late October ceremony, giving them time to prepare while taking advantage of the beautiful autumn weather. They would marry at the Double Y, with Pastor Stevens, a more open-minded clergyman from a neighboring settlement, officiating. As the wedding day approached, Madeline received an unexpected letter from Boston. Her former fiancé, William, had heard of her frontier marriage through mutual acquaintances, and wrote expressing concern for her welfare and offering to rescue her from what he presumed was a desperate situation. She showed the letter to Dane, who read it with raised eyebrows. "Quite the knight in shining armor, isn't he? Ready to save you from the clutches of your wild western rancher." "He always did have an inflated sense of his own importance," Madeline replied, taking back the letter and tossing it into the fire. "I think that's all the response it deserves." Dane pulled her into his arms. "You're sure? No second thoughts about the cultured life you could have had in Boston?" "None whatsoever." She reached up to trace the lines of his face, still marveling that this remarkable man loved her. "My life is here now, with you, with the school, with this community we're building." The wedding day dawned clear and cool, with aspen leaves turned golden against an impossibly blue sky. The ceremony was held in the meadow where they had first confessed their love, now transformed with wooden benches for guests, and an arch of autumn flowers under which they would exchange vows. Nearly 100 people attended ranch hands, neighboring families, students and their parents, and even a surprising number of townspeople, including Alina Harrington and her husband, the doctor and his wife, and several merchants who did business with the Double Y. Mayor Wilkins and the council members were conspicuously absent, but their absence did nothing to dampen the joyous atmosphere. Miguel's wife, Senora Diaz, had helped Madeline prepare a simple but elegant wedding dress, ivory silk with delicate lace trim, ordered from Denver weeks earlier. As she waited in a tent set up for her preparations, Alina Diaz and several other female students brought her a bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers tied with ribbon. "You look like an angel, Miss Vance." 8-year-old, Alina declared solemnly. "Thank you, sweetheart," Madeline replied, blinking back unexpected tears. "But soon I'll be Mrs. Yates." "Will you still be our teacher?" asked Sarah Johnson anxiously. "Of course I will," Madeline assured her, Nothing will change at school except perhaps my name on the register." When the time came, Miguel escorted her to the meadow's edge, having offered to give her away in the absence of her father. The guests stood as she appeared, and Madeline heard a collective murmur of appreciation. But she had eyes only for Dane, waiting for her beneath the flowered arch, his face alight with love as he watched her approach. Pastor Stevens conducted a simple ceremony, speaking eloquently about the foundations of marriage love, respect, partnership, and faith. When it came time for their vows, Dane took both of Madeline's hands in his. "Madeline Vance, when you came to Las Vegas, you were looking for a place to teach. What you found instead was a community that needed you far more than you could have imagined." His voice was steady, his eyes never leaving hers. "I built you a schoolhouse, thinking that was what you required to fulfill your purpose. But you've built something far greater, a bridge between different worlds, a future for children who might otherwise have been forgotten, and a home in my heart that I never knew was empty until you filled it." Tears blurred Madeline's vision as he continued. "I promise to support your dreams as you have supported mine. To stand beside you in all endeavors, to honor your independence while offering my strength when needed, to love you faithfully all the days of my life." When her turn came, Madeline's voice trembled slightly but grew stronger with each word. "Daniel Yates, when the town rejected me, you offered more than just employment or a building. You offered belief in my abilities when others doubted, respect for my vision when others dismissed it, and eventually, love that has transformed my understanding of what life can be." She squeezed his hands, drawing courage from his steady gaze. "I promise to be your partner in all things, to share your burdens and your joys, to build with you a home and a legacy that honors both our dreams, to love you with constancy and devotion as long as we both shall live." They exchanged simple gold bands, and when Pastor Stevens pronounced them husband and wife, Dane's kiss was tender yet passionate enough to elicit good-natured cheers from the assembled guests. The celebration continued well into the evening, with tables set up throughout the meadow, lanterns strung between trees, and a feast that combined the best of Western tradition with dishes contributed by every family represented. There was music and dancing, speeches and toasts, laughter and a few sentimental tears. As twilight deepened into night, Dane led his bride away from the festivities toward a waiting carriage that would take them to a small cabin he owned in the mountains, their private retreat for a week-long honeymoon. "Happy, Mrs. Yates?" he asked as he helped her into the carriage. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she replied truthfully, reaching up to touch his face. "When I came west to teach, I never expected to find a home, a purpose, and the love of my life all in one place. And I never expected that building a schoolhouse would lead to building a life together," he said, settling beside her and gathering her close. "It seems we've both been blessed beyond measure." As the carriage pulled away, their friends and neighbors waved and cheered, sending the newlyweds off with well wishes and blessings. Madeline rested her head on Dane's shoulder, contentment flowing through her. The journey that had begun with rejection had led to acceptance, love, and a future brighter than she had dared to dream. Epilogue: 5 years later, the Double Y Schoolhouse had grown again, now a proper building with 3 classrooms, a small library, and even a separate room for science experiments. Enrollment had expanded to over 60 students, with 3 full-time teachers: Madeline, Emily Johnson, now Emily Carter following her marriage to a neighboring rancher, and a young man from Denver with specialized training in mathematics and sciences. The school had become something of a model for the territory, with educators from as far away as Santa Fe occasionally visiting to observe Madeline's methods. The Las Vegas Town Council, after years of resistance, had finally acknowledged the school's success, and now contributed a small stipend to support town children's attendance. Madeline stood on the schoolhouse porch, watching as parents collected their children at day's end. At 33, she had grown into her role not just as teacher, but as a respected community leader, someone whose opinion was sought on matters beyond education. Her marriage to Dane had proven to be everything she had hoped for: a partnership of equals, each supporting the other's strengths and dreams. "Mama," a small voice called her attention to the path from the main house. 3-year-old James toddled toward her as fast as his little legs could carry him, his dark hair so like his father's, tousled by the breeze. Behind him walked Dane, carrying their 1-year-old daughter, Emma, who gurgled happily at the sight of her mother. Madeline crouched to catch James in a hug, then straightened to kiss her husband and take their daughter into her arms. "How were my 2 favorite students today?" she asked James, who had recently begun insisting on joining the big children for short periods. "I drew a horse," he announced proudly, waving a paper covered with indecipherable scribbles. "Teacher Emily said it was excellent." "It certainly is," Madeline agreed solemnly. "The best horse I've seen all day." Dane slipped an arm around her waist. "And how was your day, Mrs. Yates?" "Productive." The older students have nearly finished their history projects, and the middle group made remarkable progress with their fractions. She smiled up at him. "And yours?" "Productive as well. The new breeding stock arrived from Texas, looking even better than I hoped. And I've been thinking about that expansion we discussed, adding the northwest pasture." They began walking toward home, James skipping ahead, occasionally stopping to examine interesting rocks or chase butterflies. Emma, content in her mother's arms, babbled happily to herself. "I had a letter from a leaner today," Madeline mentioned as they walked. "The Territorial Education Board has approved funding for a proper school building in Las Vegas. They've asked me to consult on the design and curriculum." Dane's face showed genuine pleasure. "That's wonderful news. Well-deserved recognition for what you've accomplished here." "What we've accomplished," she corrected gently. "None of this would exist without you, Dane." He smiled, the smile that still made her heart quicken after years of marriage. "A fortunate partnership all around, I'd say." As they approached the main house, expanded now, to accommodate their growing family, Madeline reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The rejection that had seemed so devastating had been the gateway to everything meaningful in her life now: her marriage, her children, her school, her community. "Penny, for your thoughts," Dane said, noticing her contemplative expression. "I was just thinking about that day in Las Vegas when Mayor Wilkins told me they didn't want me as their teacher." She shifted Emma to her other hip. "It felt like the end of the world then. Now I see it was really the beginning." "The best beginnings often come from unexpected places," he agreed, stooping to swing James up onto his shoulders, eliciting delighted giggles from the boy. "I'm just grateful that when the town rejected you, you were stubborn enough to stay. And I'm grateful that when everyone else saw an unwelcome outsider, you saw a teacher worth building a schoolhouse for." She reached for his hand. "Best decision you ever made." "Second best," he corrected, squeezing her hand. "Best decision was asking you to marry me." Together, they climbed the steps to their home, the sounds of their children's laughter mingling with the distant bell of the schoolhouse that had brought them together, a reminder of dreams fulfilled and promises kept in a love that had flourished against all odds in the wild heart of the West.